Hey, this is Bruce Boudreau, and you're listening to Empty Betters with Nick, Mack, and Harrison.
Alrighty, well, we are going to get rolling with the 2023-2024 Atlantic Division preview. It is my honor to welcome Mr. Nick Bowins to the podcast. I think this is your second time on the show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, second time on, but avid listener, fellas.
I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to have you. He's going to help us cover the Atlantic Division. Can't wait to talk some Leafs. That's obviously going to be fun. But we will kick it off with the odds to win the division. These odds are as of September 12th, coming to us from FanDuel Sportsbook. We've got the Toronto Maple Leafs as the favorites to win the division at plus 220. We've got the Bruins at plus 390, the Bolts at plus 390, the Panthers at plus 500, the Senators at plus 1,000, the Sabres at plus 1,000, the Red Wings at plus 2,000, and I'm not even going to read the Habs odds because that ain't going to happen. So, knowing that, we will tee it off with the Boston Bruins. According to FanDuel, their over-under for team total points this year is 100.5. We'll see what the guys have to say about that. Last year, we all know, they set an NHL record, 65 wins, 135 points, and then they obviously got upset by Florida in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci retire. The last time they won a round was 2021, and the last time they won a cup was 2011. They made some additions this summer in JVR, Lucic, Shattenkirk, and Morgan Geekie. And then obviously the big retirees I just read, as well as Taylor Hall, Orlov, Bertuzzi, Clifton, Nosek, Foligno, and Riley. I want to know how you guys think the Bruins will bounce back this season with two huge losses from the franchise to retirement.
I'm going to jump right in and start here, just because I think a lot of the listeners maybe already know my opinion on this. I got a little bit flamed for it a couple weeks ago, but I really don't see this team being anywhere near as good as they were last year, which to me, that I don't think is a hot take. I don't think anyone this year is going to be as good as the Bruins were last year. But for me, there's two glaring issues when you look at how this team is supposed to line up this upcoming season. That's their center depth. And this is where I really got flamed, goaltending. I honestly don't think that the goaltending is going to be what it was last year. I think that those guys are both perfectly capable goaltenders, but I don't think they're going to be able to replicate what they did last year. Defense even leaves a little bit to be desired. It'll be interesting to see how Shattenkirk blends in there. But overall, I don't see this team doing anywhere near what they did last year. If you ask me about the over 100.5 points, it's going to be close, I would say, but I would tend to lean under just because, I mean, you look at a team like the Lightning last year, they were a good team all year. They made the playoffs. They had 98 points last season. So I don't really see the Bruins being as good as even the Lightning were last year, if that makes sense. Sorry to compare apples to oranges there, but that's kind of my little 2 cents there on the Bruins. Fellas, what are we thinking about all that?
Yeah, I mean, the Bruins lost a lot of pieces, like you said. I think you said there they're not going to be what they were last year. They don't have to be. That 100-point mark there is 35 points less than they had last year. Like, it was an insane year. They had 15 more wins than the Leafs, who finished second place. They had double the next best goal differential in the NHL, like all-time records. Are they going to be anywhere near that? No. But at the end of the day, it's still the Bruins. You got Marchand, you got Pasta, who finished third in points, and he's probably going to do it again this year. I like the goalie tandem a little bit more than you do there, Mac. And they got McAvoy on the back end. McAvoy's never going to be number one in the Norris because he doesn't put up the crazy points, but that guy is as good as it gets two-way. I like some of the ads. Geeky's going to get some minutes. Zaka's not a number one center, but he's going to play really well for them again. Even bringing back like Heinen on a PTO. They made some good moves. They have some good pieces. I think Boston's a wild card team. I don't think they can fall off 40 plus points. I think they finish high 90s and just kind of squeak in.
I think that's a fair assessment.
It's going to be interesting. This division, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, is so weird. There's a ton of teams like towards the top that might fall a little bit. There's two teams in particular that are looking to get into the playoffs, and we'll definitely talk about those. Nick, I agree with you. I'm concerned about Zach as a number one center. I don't know how long that is a viable option for. I know this team's got some road games throughout that always crucial month of November, so that's going to be tough for them. I could see them sneaking into the playoffs, but for the point totals, I'm going to have to go under as well.
But to that point, if you're playing between Marshy and Pasta, do you have to be a number one center? Or
That's
can you
true.
put up 65 points and just kind of do your work?
That's a good point. Yeah, he might be able to be a little fake it till you become it type thing there.
I actually see that. I think I've been teetering back and forth whether I want to say that Boston's either going to entirely miss the playoffs or they'll hit that 100-point mark. But I'm going to go a little, I think they will, and I think they're going to make a big trade at the deadline because we'll get into it when we talk about the Central Division, but I don't believe in the Winnipeg Jets, and I think the Bruins will trade for Mark Scheifele to kind of balance out the loss of Bergeron and have Zacha be second line, Coyle back down to the third line. I think they are a center away from winning their round and potentially getting back to the Stanley Cup final.
Ooh, I like that take, Jay. You know, there's another center over in the nation's capital who I think wants out of where he's from. I'm just saying, fellas, I don't know.
That's true. I think if this team does get into the playoffs, watch out. I mean, the guys that were there last year, they're going to be angry. They're going to be determined to put that to bed. So I think they absolutely could come in as, a 7 or an 8 seed and steal around.
I'm so torn on this. I came into this recording thinking, the Bruins they're going to fall off. They lost their captain. They lost their 2 longest tenured players. I agreed with Mac, not huge on I think that was, I'm going to use the F word. I'm going to say it was a fluke last season. I don't buy it going into this year completely. That being said, I'm looking at the names on Daily Faceoff, and when you put it in front of my eyes and I hear Bowins talk about them, I'm like, ugh, they're probably going to be a wild card team, aren't they? And I'm starting to think that I'm going to say they're going to be like high 90s. I think Mac using that 98 number was very smart. Somewhere plus or minus like 3 points away from 98. Do they make the playoffs? I really hope they don't. But I do think that they're going to just somehow, some way. They're the Bruins and McAvoy on the back end, like you said.
I think that part too, whether or not they actually squeak in or not, is going to depend a lot on what Nick said with some of these other teams that are looking to kind of get out of the basement where they've been for the last couple of years and get back into the postseason. And we'll get to that in just a sec.
So before we move on to our next team, I just want a yes or no answer from the other 4 on this recording. Bruins make the playoffs, yes or no?
I'm going to say yes.
Yes, wild card.
Yes, 8th seed.
I'll be different. No.
Oh yeah, Mac. I love that. I'm riding with Jay on that one.
I think they just miss, and I think it's less about them being bad and more about some of these other teams being too pesky.
I agree. Well, we got a pesky team coming up right here, the Buffalo Sabres. They are listed on FanDuel to have their over-under team points at 92.5. They haven't made the playoffs since 2011, and they haven't won a playoff round since 2007. And they have also never won a Stanley Cup. They score a lot. They give up a lot. That was the name of the game last season. You guys know they're probably the biggest over team, arguably, in the league last year. The big story for them, obviously, Tage Thompson. He had an unreal breakout season, leading all Sabres scoring with 94 points. And Rasmus Dahlin, let's not forget him. Not only did he get a big payday this offseason, he also had 132 blocked shots last year. They added Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson. They lose Craig Anderson and Vinny Hinostroza. I think the big question coming into this season, are they going to make that leap? Goaltending. We saw Devin Levi a little bit at the end of last year. We got UPL, who had stints of greatness, but most part he didn't look great last season. What do you guys think the Sabres are going to do?
Did you say 92?
Yeah, 92 is their over under.
Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with that has to be an over. They had 91 last year.
Yeah.
Do they not think that Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin and Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins and Peyton Krebs and Casey Middlestat and should I keep going got better? I mean, they're replacing Craig Anderson with Devin Levi. Everybody says, oh, Levi's going to have to prove it. He can't be worse than Craig Anderson. Can't do it. So I don't see how the Buffalo Sabres can only be 1 point better this year. I think they are a playoff team for sure, especially when you think about Boston lost some pieces, Tampa lost some pieces, Florida's got some injuries. These guys are hungry for it. They haven't tasted the playoffs yet. They are going to go full 100 all season long here. And then, you know, some of the other teams that don't play a full 82, they take a couple games off because they know they're going to be in the playoffs. Buffalo's not about that. Buffalo's going to be scoring lots of goals, hopefully saving lots of them too. Buffalo's in the playoffs, fellas.
Ooh, I love the energy. I'm kind of with you with most of what you said. I mean, looking at what their lineup is projected to be, I think it's pretty sharp. It's pretty young. It's pretty quick. I really like, and obviously these are just, we usually use daily face-off for projected lines, but right now their fourth line, this sounds like a really good, just like pesky fourth line to me. Zemgus Jurgensons, Tyson Yost, and Kyle Oposo. I love that. That's kind of sums up for me what kind of team this can be. Play with a little grit, a little chip on your shoulder. And we all know what the fans in Buffalo can do too to kind of amp up the energy for them. So I'm with you. I think this is definitely a playoff team. I think also that's a criminal number to be putting them at for the over-under. I'm easily taking over there.
This is a young team. It's a fun team for sure to watch. I mean, their games were awesome last year. I'm rooting so hard for this team to get back into the playoffs. I'm going to will them in this year, which now means they're not going to make it. But yes, this team is making the playoffs. Yes, they're going over 92.5 total points. They've got youth, but I have like confidence in the youth. Like Dylan Cousins is the second line center. I kind of love that. And on a line with JJ Peterka and Middlestat, that I love that setup right there.
Yeah, it's just going to come down to the fact if all the youth can kind of click together at once. And is it going to be a situation where like, oh, we have a little bit of expectations now. How are they going to be able to handle that? Because you see some teams kind of like fly by the seat of their pants. Like, we don't know what we're doing. We're just playing good hockey and we're trying to win. But then you also have those same situations where a young core kind of cracks under the pressure. So I'm not gonna say it's a make or break year, but depending on what happens, it could either one bounce could go their way or against their way, and the season's either over or it's going all in. So it's going to be a fun team to watch, no doubt.
Something else to keep an eye on. We saw maybe a little bit of this last year, but I think it's going to be just elevated this year is like this, to me, at least the Sabres, the Senators, and the Red Wings are all kind of right in a similar situation with their rebuild, like where they're at with all that. And it's going to be really interesting to see because for a while, I feel like towards the beginning of the season, they're going to be kind of neck and neck in that division, all three of those teams trying to figure out which one of them is going to make that extra step this year and which one of them might need another year to do it. And to me, I think Buffalo out of those three is clearly the best one of those three. The other two, it's kind of a toss-up if one of them can elevate their game enough to kind of make that extra step, or if they're both just going to miss the playoffs or just not quite get there again. But I think that's one storyline this year in the NHL I'm really looking forward to keeping an eye on is those three teams and kind of how they develop.
I think what I like about Buffalo there, when you look at those three teams in particular, you all mentioned it, it's a young core, but they didn't make any crazy additions this offseason. Like they said, hey, we look pretty damn good last year. Let's give the boys a shot here and see what this year's about. It's not a make or break year yet. It's not a big contract year yet. Let's give our guys confidence, let them grow and see what they can do here. You look at Ottawa, they've added Giroux and DeBrincat and Tarasenko, and some of those have worked out, some of them haven't. You look at Detroit and they're bringing in guys like Petrie and Comfer and Kopp last year. Haven't really seen those work out yet. I love the fact that Buffalo drafted for what felt like a decade, really high picks, and they're just letting the boys go at it, right? Like they want to see their guys become the modern day core that gets them in a playoff run 3, 4, 5 years in a row here. And Alex Tuck. Somebody's got to talk about him because I might be the biggest Alex Tuck guy in Canada. I love him. He is the heart and soul of that team 100%.
It's so cool that he's a hometown boy too. I love storylines like that, and you can tell he's got a lot of pride putting that sweater on every night, which is always cool to see.
This is tough. Mac, you said what I was about to say, that Ottawa Detroit comparison, right? And you could probably throw Florida in there. I mean, yes, they made the Stanley Cup final, but they barely made the playoffs. Let's not forget that. So those 4 teams, and then you add in the Metro teams all fighting for that wild card, assuming you got the big dogs staying in the top 3, Tampa, Boston, Toronto. That's tough. That's really tough. I think for me, and Bowins, I want to ask you this question. It comes down to goaltending. I don't think this team's going to have a problem scoring. I don't doubt that. I'm a little worried with that young tandem, and we saw a little bit of Levi, but do you have concern about the in between the pipes?
Not really, because again, I love giving the guys a chance, and you touched on it. I mean, the Sabres were scoring like crazy last year. If they're getting you 3, 4 goals a game, you're hoping Levi can save 2, 3, whatever it takes, right? And UPL was a top tier prospect too, guys. Like I feel like he gets passed over a little bit because he's been up and down so many times like a toilet seat. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're 2 young goalies that were highly touted, and you don't often say that about goalies. Like how many times going into a draft is there, okay, this is the guy, and now coming into the NHL here, both of these guys have been touted as that. One of them's got to hit if you're taking the odds there.
Harry, I got a little comparison for you. Okay, let me take you in the Wayback Machine to last season. This time we're doing exactly what we're doing right now, previewing the Atlantic Division. I'm pretty sure all of us said the Boston Bruins were going to be shit. We initially pointed out how their goalies are unproven. Jeremy Swayman, Allmark, we thought they weren't going to do anything.
Yep.
I mean, you've got 2 goalies here that are equally unproven and even younger. And as Bowins just said, I mean, more highly touted than those 2 guys were going into last year for the Bruins. So, I mean, I think to me, if the team in front of them can play well and kind of fire things up from there, I think one of those goalies can get hot enough to make it work.
So Devin Levi for Vezina, just book it now.
Yeah, I was going to say, cool. He's going to Vezina. It's over, done. All right.
All right.
Listen.
Calder, if you want to hedge Bedard, it's Levi for Calder.
There you go.
If Buffalo's getting in the playoffs, Chicago ain't.
When's the last time a goalie won the Calder? Does anyone know off the top of their head?
I don't know, but I feel like it's good odds.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say Buffalo makes the playoffs. I'll explain why when we get to a later team. But I do think that they can make it. And I will say this, and Nick alluded to it. I think they're going to be the most fun team to watch in the NHL. Definitely top 5 team. If you're, at intermission when the NHL has their god awful schedule lined up equally, maybe you take the last 2 minutes of the first period for them and give Tage a watch. I love watching them.
Caught them live a few times last year. They absolutely torched the Caps both times.
Yeah. All right. Do all of us have them in the playoffs?
I do, and I think there's even a world where they finish top 3 if the goaltending can do what it might be able to do, and if the Bruins fall off harder than some of us might think.
I was gonna say I also have the Sabres going into the playoffs this year. I'm gonna agree with Mac that I think they're gonna end up finishing top 3 because we all said that the Bruins are gonna be a wild card, and we don't know about Florida, we don't know about Detroit, we don't know about Ottawa. Well, there's got to be a third team in there if you're throwing in Tampa Bay and Toronto in that top 2 at the very least. So, and I got to go Buffalo. And to answer your question, the last time a goalie won the Calder, 2009 Mr. Steve Mason of the Columbus
Ooh.
Blue Jackets.
Great trivia
How
question.
random. That is crazy.
Thank you for the fact check. Nick, or both Nicks, I guess. Playoffs.
Playoffs. Sorry, I was grabbing some water, but
You kidding
playoffs.
me? Playoffs.
Third, and then got to shout out Zach Benson too. He's not going to play a factor this year, but
Dude.
guys, that guy going 13th overall last year was the biggest steal of the draft.
And you and I were texting before that draft, and what did I say? I was like, the Washington Capitals need to draft Zach Benson, and they did not.
Yep, they did not. So bad karma for the Cap. Sabres make the playoffs.
Yep.
All right, well, we will move on to the Detroit Red Wings. Their over-under for team total points is listed at 86.5. They last made the playoffs in 2016, and they last won a round in 2013. They added Alex DeBrincat, JT Compher, Daniel Sprong, Jeff Petrie, Klim Kostin, and Christian Fisher. Exits are Kubalik and Zadina. Biggest question, Ville Husso, James Reimer. I don't really like that much. Dylan Larkin, I mean, could he break 90 points this season? There's definitely a possibility of that. Similar to Buffalo, this team is desperate to get into the playoffs. We all talk about the Yzer plan constantly, what for good or for worse at this point. What do you guys think about the Red Wings going into this season?
I think they just miss. I really want this team to also be good and get into the playoffs because I sort of think the NHL is better when the Detroit Red Wings are good, if that makes sense.
100%.
Love the DeBrincat coming home move. Just like we were talking about Tuck playing in Buffalo. I think that's sick. I think these guys are just like a couple years away from being like a solid playoff team coming out of this division. But the goaltending is much more concerning than, let's say, Buffalo's or Boston's. Center depth again. I think they have JT Compher listed as their second center. I don't think I'm totally sold on that. And then defense, I don't know. You can look at it either way.
I think the blue line is brutal. Jackson, you go ahead, but got to throw that in there.
I was making the same point that, I mean, outside of Sider and maybe Wallman, like Petrie, Gosh Despair, and Hull as half of your D-core, and I'm using D-core with Gosh Despair in air quotes, like it's gonna be rough. And I just have to, my full bias is coming out. I don't think Detroit comes anywhere near playoffs. I think they're going to be like 8 to 10 points out when everything's said and done.
All right, here's what I'll say. I like the forward core actually a lot. I like the moves they've added. I mean, I think third line, we talk about the third line test on this podcast a lot. This one passes for me. Fabry, Kopp, and Sprong. I mean, when those guys are playing at the top of their game, at least, right?
And
put it that way.
When healthy.
Yes, that's true too. That's fair. But those guys all have the potential to be good players. The D definitely is a little sketchy, but it's almost like the Island of Misfit Toys or something, right? I mean, you got a couple of guys here that have really kind of been, I guess, kind of shunned by some of their past fan bases. And I know Hull got a lot of flack in Toronto, and I know Goss Despair has been, a lot of people have. I thought he was done for a while after he left the Flyers. I think he only kind of just got back into being like a relevant name that people are even talking about just last season. So, I mean, that one's kind of a coin flip. But yeah, the goaltending for me kind of solidifies that this team can't quite make the next push. I don't think they're a playoff team. I tend to lean a little closer to what Manella said rather than Jackson. I think they'll come kind of close, but not quite get there, because I do think they have some offensive firepower that can definitely win them some games, like DeBrincat and Larkin. And I mean, for my money, I actually think Mo Seider is like one of the best defensemen in the entire league already. But just one guy, not going to win you a lot of games. So
I'm excited to see Larkin to have like some actual wingers to play with too.
Yeah.
Like a legit top line for once is nice.
Right. And
I want to see so much
Anthony
more out of
Miller.
Lucas Raymond.
Yeah.
That guy, he
Yeah.
had 12 more points in his rookie year than he did last year. Even Sider, I think he had 10 more points in his rookie year than he did last year. Like, they need those guys to take a step. I said it with Buffalo, like, they didn't add pieces because they're not truly competing yet. Whereas Detroit's been signing guys the last 3 off seasons. You look at the Sherratts, the Cops in the last couple of years, and then Comfer and Hole and Petrie this year. Like, Detroit's adding their pieces right now because their picks haven't taken that next step. Zadina's out of town because he didn't work out. Valeno hasn't taken that step. Rasmussen is a 4th-line center right now. That's not what you need out of your high picks. So I'm just not sold on Detroit. I think they're just in a weird spot of in between kind of. They're mid right now.
Do you think there's a situation where Valeno turns it around at any point this upcoming season, or do you think that ship has kind of sailed?
I watch him and I still like the way that he plays. And he's a noted hockey collector follower, so I can't give him too much shade here, but like, a trade is the best option for him. Like, give him a fresh scenery, send him somewhere like Seattle where he's going to get 2nd, 3rd line minutes with some equal guys around him and playing a good system, and he can be a good player.
Or DC, who knows?
I hate the goaltending. I'll come out right here and say it. Don't like that. D is mid, I would say. Offense, Mac, you said that 3rd line test. I agree if they like play up to their potential. Like when Kopp was on the Rangers and just snatched my heart from that 3-1 lead that the Penguins had a couple seasons ago, he was a monster. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's going to get paid. He deserves it. He's a playoff guy. Last season, 9
he can
goals.
be a beast, but yeah, no, he was very, very disappointing.
I drafted him on fantasy. I was like, this guy's going to be a beast. He was very, very average at best. Sprong, we all here know what he is capable of. Whether he does that is a whole separate conversation.
So streaky is the problem with Sprong.
On the ice and off the ice.
and then Fabry, I mean, that's just like the biggest, like so much potential, but I just feel like I'm going to be disappointed by that line. Assuming that line stays together. I don't think Detroit's going to make the playoffs. 86.5. I think they're 86 on the dot, maybe, right? I think
that
that's
sounds
kind of
about right. Yeah.
I think the odds for this team winning this division is the most indicative thing. Like we say that they're in sort of like the same breath as like Ottawa and Buffalo. Buffalo was plus 1,000. These guys are plus 2,000. I think that sums it up perfectly.
And I think there's going to be a lot of goals with this team. Look for overs is what I would say. I think they can put the puck in the back of the net. I honestly do.
Yeah.
They're still going to be the Lightning 3 times this year. So
it's Nick's famous bet. Always take the Red Wings when they play the Bolts for some reason. It always hits when he does it. And I can't explain it. All righty. Well, let's move on to the next team. And this is one I am really excited to talk about. The Florida Panthers, the reigning Eastern Conference champions. Their team total point is set at 98.5 on FanDuel. They upset Boston in the first round last year and then went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Matthew Tkachuk, monster year, 109 points. Would have won the Conn Smythe if they won the Cup. Bobrovsky, we know what he did in the playoffs last season. They are going to have $9.8 million on LTIR with Ekblad and Montour to start the season. We have Evan Rodriguez leaving, Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, these are guys coming. Evan Rodriguez, Alvin Ekman Larson, Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, and Anthony Stolars. Then exits Duclair, Gudis, Colin White, and the Stahl brothers and Alex Lyon. What do you guys think about the Panthers? I mean, can they do it again? I think that's really the question everybody wants to know.
The big thing is if they're going to be able to recover from a potentially like really slow start, because especially like you just said, that their top 2 defensemen being out, that's going to be bad enough. And then whatever lingering issues Matthew Tkachuk may have from his injury, is there going to be some sort of regression with Bobrovsky, as we saw like in the last couple of games against Vegas? Like, was last year a fluke? We talk about Boston that their last year was a fluke. Is the last year with the Panthers is a fluke? Like the 2 potentially most flukiest teams of the 2022 season in the first round playing each other. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to be able to do. I like OEL. No, he's not Arizona OEL where he's going to be competing for maybe top 5 finish in the Norris anymore, but he still, I think, could be a productive player. I think he'll still be solid for however long those top 2 guys are out. it's just going to really, their team defense is just going to have to be impeccable all season long. And especially in that early stretch, as they're still trying to figure out what to do with their goalies and Bobrovsky and Anthony Stolarz and potentially Connor Knight.
Yeah, I think everything you said is pretty accurate. I think the biggest area of my concern besides injuries, and I don't know if any of you guys know like what the timetable is with any of that, Montour, Ekblad, probably not at this point, but bottom six to me, it feels bad. I mean, you got Lucian, Lundell, Denisenko, Lomberg, Lorenz, and Cousins. All of those guys have had, stints of looking like pretty decent NHLers, but I think especially the last four that I mentioned, I think Lucian is maybe the best one I just mentioned, but yeah, some of those guys I think just leave something to be desired. I think the goaltending definitely, my answer to Jackson's question, do we see a regression with Bobrovsky? I think it's almost impossible not to. I think that part to me is a fluke, how he just kind of started playing really good again all of a sudden. And I fully expect him to just be like normal, mediocre, overpaid Bob again. And, if he does do that, then you have Anthony Stolarz to turn to, which doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. To me, this is the classic make it to the Stanley Cup final and then suck a lot the next year that we've seen out of the Canadians. We saw it a little bit out of the Predators and the Sharks. I mean, you name any team that makes it to the Cup final and loses, there's usually some sort of regression that occurs after that because you still just played as long of a season as the Stanley Cup champs did, but you got nothing from it. So there's just that much more kind of heartache to tack onto it. Guys are tired. Guys are hurt. Guys didn't have enough time to rest up. So yeah, those are all things I'm kind of thinking about as I try to figure out what the hell this Florida Panthers team is going to be like this season.
It's a weird team, man. It's going to be tough to predict because, everybody says 2 years ago they won the President's Trophy, 122 points, whatever it was. It's a different team. It was a different team. They had like Claude Giroux, Ben Sherratt, they had Duclair still. They had all these different pieces, and they had a different coach. You guys remember that? They fired Burnett after an unreal season, and they brought in Paul Maurice. I think Paul Maurice he got all his juju out in the last playoffs there. Like, they really just snuck into the playoffs. Calgary had more points than them, and we spent the whole summer talking about should Calgary blow it up. They were tied with Nashville, and we said, oh, Nashville's a joke. They were 1 point ahead of both Pittsburgh and Buffalo, and both those teams, they're fighting for it, right? So they were barely there, and going on that deep playoff run, obviously the injuries, I think we're looking at November, December for Ekblad and Montour, not sure on Tkachuk. But, Paul Maurice being a new guy last year, taking over for a President's Trophy winning team, he had to use a lot of his tactics and motivation last year in the Cup run to get them there. They are a great playoff team. I don't think they can get back to the playoffs. I think they are going to see more of a regression. The Bruins are obviously regressing too, like we said, but they had such a cushion from last year. The Panthers, they made it in by 1 point. If they regress at all in the regular season, they're on the outside looking in.
I totally agree. I think it would be one thing if this team's roster got better over the offseason, but it clearly didn't. And to me, I really can't get past having your 2 best defensemen and really 2 out of your 3 best players from that Cup run not available potentially for the entire year of 2023. I just don't see how you survive in the Eastern Conference like that. So I think they miss.
Yeah,
Josh Mahura was their
nailed it.
7th D in the playoffs, and he's on their top pair right now.
Exactly.
It is totally different.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think it's gonna come down to other teams that are just gonna play better, and this is not the year to be in the Eastern Conference and have a slow start, basically.
And to check in on some of those injuries, there is optimism for Tkachuk that he'll be ready by preseason. So there is that. Ekblad 100% sometime between November and January. He'll be ready. There is some slight optimism with Montour potentially playing in maybe late October or November, but it would be the 6 months out would be at some point in mid-December from his surgery. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And it was obviously on the shoulder and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we're looking at for basically the 3 best players on the Panthers right now.
I thought I was going to be the asshole who said that this team's not going to make the playoffs, but I'm very happy that all of you just saved me from being that guy who looks bad. I do not think this team makes the playoffs, and as I mentioned earlier, that is primarily one of the reasons I do think that the Buffalo Sabres will make the playoffs. I think a lot of people just shoe in the Panthers right into the playoffs because they made the Cup final. Oh, they're going to be back. I don't buy it, and for all the reasons you guys just listed, I do think it was a little bit of a Cinderella run. I don't want to call it a fluke because damn, they earned it and they played some really damn good hockey.
They fucking battled, yeah.
It's just so strange how hockey is, right? Like you could look at a roster and be like, that's a playoff team. Like they're good in the playoffs, but can they make it? That's exactly how I look at the Panthers. I'm like, they'll beat the shit out of you, right? Like Sam Bennett in the playoffs, who doesn't want that? But can he get you into the playoffs as a second line setter? He barely did it last year. I don't think he's going to be able to do it this year. I got the Cats outside looking in, and I would be very big on that under 98.5.
I mean, unless we get a like totally healthy, 100% mentally, physically ready to go Spencer Knight, and he starts standing on his head every single game, up until January. Like barring that sort of miracle, I don't see it working out well.
Yeah, I don't think. Do any of us have the Cats in the playoffs? Anybody?
No. Nope. I thought it was going to be a hot take too, but nope. Sounds like we're all out.
Mr. Jackson, you're a little quiet.
I don't know. I have to get a better idea of the Metro to make a decision.
Okay, fair.
I think if it was just strictly like teams in order of like who I think was going to make the playoffs, I think Florida would be in that 4-5 range from the Atlantic, along with like Boston to make the playoffs and be that first or second wild card. But yeah, once I get a better idea, right now I'll probably say no because there's probably some better teams, a lot better teams in the Metro than Florida right now. But we all doubted them every single round they played last year in the playoffs, and obviously different team again from the team that was President's Trophy that made the Stanley Cup. But I don't know. There's always something weird happens that everyone doubts, and this could potentially be one of those things.
It's so funny to me that the Panthers are plus 500 to win the division and the Sabres are plus 1,000. Like that. What does that tell you, boys? It's
Vegas. Yeah, it's just they don't really.
That's funny.
Jay, I like your answer there. Some really good teams in the Metro like Pittsburgh. Yeah, you don't want to underestimate them just yet. So
I'm officially like excluding Pittsburgh.
Like, my apologies.
Yeah, I'm like there's all the other teams
Attaboy.
in the Metro, and then I'm excluding Pittsburgh. Like
you want before we move on, you guys want to hear something crazy? Speaking of FanDuel weird odds, the Pens are minus 230 to make the playoffs, and the Capitals are plus 230 to make the playoffs. I think the Penguins are better, but I do not think they're
just
that
the
much
NHL
better.
summed up in a nutshell right there.
I don't think they're that much better than the Caps. That's a big difference. You're talking about doubling your money or halfing your money. I mean, I don't know, but
We're talking about a hockey team with Tristan Jarry.
Yeah, did Don Cherry make those odds?
He might have actually, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, unless you guys get rid of some Russians, I don't think you're going to be popping up there. So we will move on to the Montreal Canadiens. They're plus 11,000 to win the division. I did not read that earlier because that's outlandish, but nonetheless, I'll read it. They are projected at 71.5 points as their over-under. The last time that they won a Stanley Cup was 1993. They are also the most recent Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup. Sorry, Bowins, in 1993. Last made the playoffs in the Mickey Mouse year, as Nick likes to call it, 2021. Nick Suzuki, top scorer with 66 points. They added Alex Newhook. They leave Joel Edmondson and Jonathan Drouin. Big questions. Honestly, I think the question is, are they going to finish last? And what can Cole Caulfield do? That's really it.
All he can do this year is stay healthy. Like, I hope he has a great year. I hope it's a ton of fun for us to watch. I love him and Suzuki playing with each other. And I think that if Doc is on that line, that could be a ton of fun to watch as well. But name of the game for him has to be stay healthy.
What's that hearing? Oh, I'm hearing tank treads from all the way over here. Mr. Macklin Celebrini from Boston University, come on down to Montreal, Canada. I think team is going to be bad. I don't think there's no way they're getting out of the cellar of this division. Like they would have to pull off some of the most random bullshit. Like there would have to be a catastrophic injury to some of the teams above them for them to not finish last. And I think that's good for them. They are still in a deep rebuild after their missing out on winning a Stanley Cup. So I think the name of the game is to roll out those Abrams, or the Canadian equivalent of an Abrams tank, and just get good players and be ready for the mid to late 2020s.
Yeah, I heard somebody say it the other day, I forget where, and it's not a knock on Marty St. Louis, but they basically said Marty St. Louis isn't meant to be a coach of a contending team yet. Like, he's not the tactical, motivational dude that's going to will the Florida Panthers to the Cup final last year. He is a developmental coach that is brought in to work with Suzuki and Caulfield and the 6 young guys on their blue line, and Reinbacher when he gets there, and Doc that they brought in on a reclamation project, and Elias Anderson that they took a flyer on, and Alex Newhook that they took from Colorado. Like, he is there to develop players, and that's what this year is all about. They want to lose, but lose respectably. Like, they want their guys to take a step. They want their guys to put up points. Nick Suzuki, I know him back from his own Sound days, and like, he's just the best guy. Like, he is the best leader for Montreal. That is such a pressure cooker, and he just handles it perfectly. So having those kind of core pieces of Suzuki, Caulfield, I'm gonna throw Doc in there. It's so key that they have those guys and they're learning and growing under St. Louis, because this ain't the year.
I think a guy like Newhook could fit into the system really well, especially if he is playing with a guy like Christian Dvorak. I really do like that as a second line winger and center pairing.
Yeah, and a kid from Eastern Canada.
Yeah. I think I'm looking at the forward core, and I was tempted to say I really like the first 2 lines, and then I looked at the third line and I was like, yeah, I actually kind of like the third line too. And like fourth line, I like the forward core. I don't think it's really that bad. Where it gets bad is with, as Bowins mentioned, the really inexperienced decor, the goaltending. I mean, they did nothing different than last year. They were just like, yeah, play that same song again. And then like same shit. So I mean, I feel like this is a team that's just going to let in so many goals and maybe score some. Maybe it's an over team sometimes, but yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say. I think what Bowen said about Marty St. Louis, that's the biggest bright spot you can look toward if you're a Habs fan listening right now. It's not all doomsday, because there's good things happening. I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm wearing an Orioles hat, so you know that I know how to watch a really bad sports team for the duration of their rebuild. And trust me, there's sunny skies eventually, but you're gonna have to go through it for a little while. And
a Sabres jersey. Or Senator's jersey.
Yeah, geez. Right. Well, I mean, this is just kind of for fun, but you know.
I look at this team and I got one big question. It has nothing to do with like how they're going to perform. Why is Josh Anderson on this team? I feel like that's a great trade piece to just get younger, get more developmental guys. He's a playoff performer. He was unreal in that season where they had the Mickey Mouse run. I mean, shit. I think any team, it's like a Tom Wilson light almost, I would say. Big guy, right-handed, can score, fights, hits. He's got a $5.5 million cap hit, according to Cap Friendly, for the next 4 seasons. I can't believe, I mean, they could get a haul for him.
I think he goes at some point. I think the issue is you got to have somebody on your hockey team, and you got to hit the cap floor somehow. Like, you look at their decor, and like all those guys could be at league minimum other than like Matheson and Savard, right? So you want to call some pieces up. You want to have Reinbacher playing up next year. You want to have Hudson playing up next year. You got to have somebody making money. Otherwise, you're not going to hit the cap floor like the Coyotes.
Yeah.
What Bowens, what are you looking for out of Slavkovsky this year? Because that was a little bit of a up and down year last year.
I honestly have trouble putting a pulse on that one. I think that's going to come out as one of the weirdest draft classes, obviously because of COVID. But like, you kind of, couple weeks heading up to that draft, you kind of heard we're not high on Wright, but we're not high on Slavkovsky either. So kind of look at it now, and I don't know what he is as a player. He's a physical freak. I want him to use his body more. I want him to be Barkov style on the wing, like a bigger guy like that. I'm worried that he becomes a Josh Anderson. No offense to Josh Anderson. Like he's a big power body. He's not the fastest skater. He's got a good shot, but I haven't seen the IQ too much. So he's got to take a step. I think that probably comes with getting an opportunity playing with some of their skill guys, whether it's Newhook or Doc or Suzuki, just somebody who sees the game well so that he can learn it at an NHL level, because it wasn't there last year.
No, and I think both him and Wright need to have big years, and Wright obviously needs to figure out where he's playing this year. So it'll be interesting what happens with those guys that went 1-4 or whatever Wright fell to.
There's a lot of pressure being a number one pick in Montreal. I don't know if you can find a more pressure cook situation in sports, to be honest, than that.
Well, I'm not even going to ask the question that I've asked for previous teams about playoffs, because I think we all know our answer for that. So my conclusion of the Canadiens preview, they definitely smell like an over team. They're going to be giving up a lot of goals. It reeks of over. Cole Caulfield, good fantasy pickup. That's all I got to say. All right, we are going to move on to a very interesting team that is probably going to make or break a lot of playoff predictions this season. The Ottawa Senators. Their team total points is listed at 91.5. They last made the playoffs and won a round in 2017 before Chris Kunitz ended their franchise. What you got a comment there,
buddy.
Mac?
Okay.
He did. Did he not? All right. Well,
but you had to slip that in, didn't you?
I did have to slip it in.
All right. Keep going.
Tim Stützle. There we go. Top scorer with 90 points. Jake Sanderson just got paid. I've never seen someone with so much inexperience get so much money, but he got 64 mil at the ripe age of 21. Congratulations. They added Kubalik, Tarasenko, and Korpisalo. They lose DeBrincat and Cam Talbot. Some big questions for this team. Can they make the playoffs? Stützle, maybe he breaks 100. Tarasenko, what's he going to look like? Josh Norris, bounce back season. A lot of big questions. What do you guys expect out of the Senators this year?
Kind of feel like they're the hockey equivalent of the Tennessee Titans, where they had a exciting young player who they should have probably kept around. Slightly different situations. Obviously talking about AJ Brown, who went to the Eagles, and Alex DeBrincat with the Senators, where they essentially got a guy who's potentially around the same level of player, probably worse, but older. You get Kubalik, you get Tarasenko. They got a little younger in Korpisalo over Talbot, but I feel like this team is they're just mid. Like, I don't know. Like, they have some exciting pieces, but they just feel like they're spinning the tires right now and just trying to say, hey, we did something. We got rid of this younger guy because he may or may not want to be here. And then, okay, we'll get the same level player, but older, because we want to show that we did something. So I'm not huge on Ottawa right now. Maybe prove me wrong, but it's just giving me that vibe, Tennessee Titans, and the Tennessee Titans vibe is not good right now. So
I love those cross sports comparisons. That's an interesting one.
I think they're a good team. They got a lot of good pieces. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. That's kind of my summary of the Ottawa Senators.
Ooh.
Like, I just don't think that they have it in terms of depth. We don't know what Korpisalo we're going to get in net. Sometimes he's great, sometimes he's not. But mostly my rant here is going to be about Senators fans, because the last week or two since Sanderson signed and when they got Chychrun, the entire discourse of Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it was that the Senators have the best top 6D in the league. And you just don't. You just don't. If you didn't make the playoffs last year, you can't have the best top 6D in the league. And if you have Travis Hamonic in your top 6D, you can't have the best top 6D in the league. So Senators fans got to chill a little bit. They got a ton of great players. Stützle, Tkachuk, love the Tarasenko addition. Giroux was the best thing they could have added to that team. Senators fans, chill.
I'm going to agree with you in the sense that I think they have a lot of exciting players, especially up front. You mentioned Kachuk, you mentioned Stützle. Obviously, it's not a mint condition Vladdy T that we're getting here in Ottawa. It's a little bit aged. He's been out of the wrapper for a while. Drake Batherson was a fantasy stud last year. I think we all probably had him on our team at some point throughout the season. I think my big question is Josh Norris. Obviously, crazy bad injury last year, missed essentially the entire season. I'm interested to see what he can bounce back with. I don't necessarily hate the decor, but Nick, I totally agree with you. It is not top 6 in the league. Shabbat, Chikrin, that's great. Love the youth with Sanderson and Brandstrom. I think both of those guys are going to continue to grow and be studs. I don't know if I would have jumped on Sanderson for 8 years right off the bat, but that might look really smart 4 years from now.
Yeah,
Mac, what
I
do you
think
got?
I think you guys aren't far off. I think that I agree most with what Bowen said about how they really just have a lot of good like players like individually, and it's kind of yet to be determined to see how they're all going to kind of mesh together. I think the goaltending definitely is a little sketch. We don't know. I mean, Korpisalo is a guy that like I've never really been sold on. I think he has good numbers like on paper. But I don't know how he plays. I mean, it helps to have a decent decor in front of him, and that's what I'll call this decor decent. I definitely think Sens fans need to chill with saying it's like the best in the league. That's crazy. I mean, Giroux is a guy that this podcast used to hate on. I think we can fully like put our foot in our mouth on that one because he's been pretty darn good the last couple of years since getting out of Philly. So, and even the last year or two there, but. This is a team, let me put it this way. This is a team that I think if they were in the Western Conference, maybe they sneak in. It's a team that like isn't so far off that it's not a question, but I just don't think I think where they're going to run into trouble is the Metro division is going to have too many teams battling for that same spot that they're battling for. And I just don't know if they're ready yet to beat those teams out for a position.
This one's tough. This is probably the hardest team in the division to evaluate, in my opinion. I am bullish on the Senators on really one condition. Nick, you mentioned Josh Norris. He's got to be healthy. That's kind of like my X factor, right? I think he can be an unreal second line center for them if he's, going full speed. Shane Pinto, another guy, had a pretty good season last year, was on my fantasy team, hit the 20 goal mark for the first time. Young guy coming up. Look for him to have maybe another big year. Maybe he goes to, 25 or 30, who knows? Depends where he plays. I like the Sens, though. I got to be honest. I look at the Eastern Conference, and we're talking about Boston, and we're talking about some of the Metro teams in Florida. I think they're kind of like my dark horse. I feel like they could be like a 7 seed in the East and maybe like win a round. Maybe we'll see. It depends on the goaltending and Norris, in my opinion. But I really like the lineup. I think it passes the third line test. If Norris stays healthy, I think they're a playoff team.
Wow. I think like it's, these guys and the Sabres have the same odds to make it in. And 9 out of 10 times, I would take the Sabres getting in the playoffs over the Sens team.
Really?
Yeah, that's another one where Vegas is just like, I don't know, this is the
Yeah.
same team. Give them both the same odds.
Right.
Which, whatever. But the last thing I'll say is a little bit about what Jackson said, comparing kind of DeBrincat to to Kubalik. Lost my train of thought there for a second. But Kubalik is basically just like a slightly older, slightly bigger, slightly worse DeBrincat, in my opinion. I mean, he's going to basically serve the same spot that DeBrincat had, but probably not put up as many points. So that's kind of a weird one. But I think that it's just weird that they're not. To me, the Senators have for the last 5 years been a team that like no one wants to play for, basically. And I'm not sure that they're fostering enough of like a great environment. And I think I'm a big believer in that mattering a lot. That's part of why I don't think that's part of why I think the Bruins could fall off enough to miss the playoffs is like losing your captain, I think does a lot more to you off the ice than a lot of people are willing to realize. And I kind of feel the same way about the Senators, where I'm like, I'm not sure there's enough like team chemistry and things like that going on for them to really be competitive.
Yeah, I get that. I think I liked what Stutzel said when DeBrincat left. He's like, if you don't want to be here, then don't. Like, we want guys who want to be here, and that's what you like to see, that buy-in with the Shabbats. He's been there for a while. Sanderson, Tkachuk, all those young guys coming up together. Don't love the Kubalik DeBrincat comparison. I think it's more looking at the Tarasenko slot there. Kubalik topped out at a career high of 45 points, but DeBrincat, that was his lowest season, was 45, and he's been up in the 70s, right? So DeBrincat's going to do great in Detroit. Kubalik and Tarasenko, I think, fill that void combined in Ottawa of what they hoped he would be. But I do want to see a full season out of Jacob Chychrun too. Like, that guy has been talked about for years getting traded. You got traded, time to prove it type thing.
I should have mentioned that name too. If he's healthy, I mean, they're a good team. Like, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking about the Sabres. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I might be more on the Ottawa train. Maybe that's a hot take, but I don't know.
What do you guys think about Stützle? Do you think this is a situation where this guy could get over 100 points this year? Because he has been right there the last one.
Yeah, I think he can hit it at some point. He's got great vision. Like, you look at some of the cross ice plays that he makes on the power play with, whether it's Tkachuk or Giroux, like, some of the plays he's pulling out are amazing. I do wish he would dive a little bit less, but he's a hell of a player.
I think if you look at the guys he's going to be playing with, I think absolutely he could with, Tkachuk, Tarasenko, Giroux, depending on whether it's, power play or just his normal line. All those guys are guys he can feed or get fed from. So I think definitely he could.
Yeah, I'm thinking high 90s. Let's put everybody on the hot seat here. Playoffs, yes or no? I already stated mine. I'm going to say yes.
Nope.
I'm going to go probably they're going to be, instead of the Red Wings, they're the team that's barely going to miss. This is the team that's barely going to miss, like 2 or 3, maybe even a point behind.
They will get close.
Yes.
Yeah,
Ottawa,
I think they get close. Don't make it.
I think I'm in the same boat. Ottawa and Florida get super close, but lose it out to a Metro team. I think 4 come from each division this year.
Like, literally could be like a last night of the season, like missed by a point kind of thing.
I'd love to see a poll from our fan base. A 7-game series right now. You haven't seen one game of this season yet, just based on roster alone. Buffalo or Ottawa in a best of 7. That would be, yeah, he's repping. And Mac has the Sens jersey, even though he'd probably pick Buffalo. I'd love to see the answers to that. That'd be great. All right, we are going to move on to our next team, the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their team total points is set at 100.5. Kucherov leads scoring again with 113 points. Sergachev led the defenseman in scoring with 64. They last won a round in 2022 and a cup in 2021. They added Connor Sheary, Logan Brown, Luke Glendening, Austin Watson on a PTO, and Jonas Johansson. And they lose Alex Killorn, Corey Perry, Pat Maroon, Brian Elliott, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, Ross Colton, and Ian Cole. I mean, the Bolts, it's always cup or bust at this point, right? So I think the big question with the rest of these getting better, are these guys still considered a tier 1 cup contender?
Absolutely. They are, as long as they have Vesey, Hedman, and that top line. I think, and then you start going down the lineup and you go, this team didn't really get all that much worse in the last year.
I really like the Max Domis, or no, that's for Toronto. Never mind. But I really like. I think the forward court just looks great, and I think again they passed the 3rd line test. I like Nick Paul and Tanner Jeannot. I think they've probably overpaid for Jeannot and Hagel in terms of draft capital, but if they're going to play well for your team and you're in contending window, I think it's completely worth it. And again, as we've talked about before, when we first learned that Sheary was heading to Tampa Bay, I think that's the perfect like middle 6 guy for this team, where he can have a pretty solid regular season and he'll score big goals in the playoffs. And I just love their decor. Hedman, Sergachev, and even that bottom line with Dahan and Bogosian, I still think there's still probably a top 8 decor, maybe top 5 decor in all of hockey.
I think they're still a damn good team. They've definitely taken a step back. But hey, being an honest, candid Leafs fan here, they outplayed Toronto for most of that playoff series last year. Like, these boys still know how to win. They've still got Stammer. They've still got Cooch up front. Like, they know what they're doing. I would love to see a McDonough on the blue line still. I would love a Ross Colton or an Alex Killorn scoring goals in their middle six. Those are things that they don't have anymore because they've had to lock all these guys up. But when you look at the lineup, it's hard for me to say that Boston's going to make the playoffs and Tampa's not, because Tampa's got a little bit more firepower. They've been there more recently, and they've got the best goalie on the planet. So, Tampa, they're going to be there. I've got them in that 2 or that 3 spot. They're going to make the playoffs. They're not going to blow anybody out of the water in the regular season because they know how to do just enough to get into the playoffs and then start making some noise. I do want to mention Jonas Johansson there, the goalie. I find that signing so funny, the fact that they locked him up for 2 years. If you guys remember when he got traded from Buffalo to Colorado, I believe, one of the Sabres beat reporters, John Vogel, I think his name is, tweeted out, "This is the worst goalie I have ever seen in the NHL. He cannot make a save in practice. I do not know why they're trading him or what they're trading for." So the fact that Tampa, of all teams, this scouting guru team, goes and signs this guy for 2 years is hilarious to me, because that tweet always stands out.
First of all, I hate the Connor Sherry move so much. That is just a straight kick in the nads for the Caps fans, because that one's going to come back to hurt you. I've seen this movie before. I know exactly how it's going to go. I sort of, with this team, obviously the depth, I mean, you touched on Ross Colton, not being there, or Killorn being there to score goals. With this team, I almost have this notion that just their next man up is going to get the job done. Like, this happened with Easymont, Nick Paul. These guys sort of stepped in close to playoff time when they needed to a couple years ago, and now have full-time spots in this lineup. And I don't know. With this team, until I don't see them make the playoffs, I'm going to say they're a contender.
Yeah. I mean, I'll piggyback that. 2 or 3 seed. I echo everything you guys just said. I don't really need to repeat it. Actually, I will repeat one thing. Connor Sherry he's gonna get 20 goals. I hate to admit it. I love that move so much. He just fits that team perfectly. So yeah, they're the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, until they lose that top line, like you guys said, and Hedman, they're always going to be in the mix. Probably say they're like a 3 seed in the Atlantic. That's what I'll give them.
Worth pointing out, we are in a Stamkos contract year, right?
Oh, are we now?
Yeah. So that cap space, we got to do something about that. Yeah.
He's not leaving. You don't think he's leaving, do you, Bones?
No, he's going to retire there.
Yeah. No, he's staying. They're losing somebody else again. But like I said, remember when they lost Palat 5 years ago? And we were like, oh shit, they're done. And then they lost Tyler Johnson. We're like, oh shit, they're done. It happens every year like clockwork, and somehow they're still in the playoffs. So Stammer stays, they stay in the playoffs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Mac having some technical difficulties, so we'll see if he can hop back on. But until then, we will move on to the next team, because I think we all agree on Tampa. Last, but certainly not least, some would say you saved the best for last. The Toronto Maple Leafs. Their point total is set at 104.5. Quite a hefty number. They won their first playoff series since 2004 this past season, and then did not win another game. I like how Nick added that one to the notes. Marner led all scorers with 99 points. They added Bertuzzi, Domi, Gambrell, Reeves, Klingberg, and my favorite goalie of all time, Martin Jones. Who they lost: Michael Bunting, Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Shen, Justin Holt, and Noah Chari. Big question: off ice, Nylander extension; on ice, Matthew Nyes is probably going to have a pretty good season, I think most would say, based on what we saw last year with that small sample size. And is Joseph Wall going to make a case for starting over Samsonov? Bowins, we need you to answer all the questions that the people are wondering.
This is what I've been dying for all night, fellas. Leafs are here. Leafs are coming first in the division. They had 111 2 years ago. They had 115 last year. Even if they fall down a little bit, I don't think any of us have given out 105 plus points to anybody yet. We've all said kind of in that middle fringe section. Leafs have the deepest team in the division right now. Does that translate to playoffs? Clearly not, but regular season, Leafs are coming first. Joe Wool, you touched on there. He's definitely going to get a lot of games. Samsonov gets hurt all the time. You fellas know that from Washington. Like, Wool is going to get games. I love him. I've loved him since he was drafted. His World Junior year, he started for the World Junior U.S. team over Ottinger and Swayman. Like, this guy's been a hell of a good goalie for a long time, and he's finally taken that step. He's going to be good. Decor is very weird. Definitely going to make a move at some point, whether it's at the trade deadline, whether it's around Christmas. This isn't the decor that they take into playoffs. 100%. That's not happening. Jake McCabe, John Klingberg, they're just adding these different pieces, seeing how it goes. New power play coach in town, Guy Boucher, Batman villain or whatever he looks like. He's going to have a different power play unit there. Klingberg's going to be on the top pair for the PP there instead of Morgan Riley. So curious how that goes. Then you touched on Nylander. I mean, we thought he balled out last year. 40 goals, 47 assists. He looked amazing. He looked like an absolute star. He looked like the best player on the ice more nights than not. He's going to bump that up even more. He's getting paid this offseason. So Nylander's going to crack 90 points this year. It's going to come down to seeing, what the depth does, because you know what you're getting out of Matthews. You know what you're getting out of Marner, Nylander, Tavares, Riley at this point. So, that's my Leafs rant coming first. Nylander's having another hell of a year.
So my question to you with these guys is, what's the biggest move in the offseason? Like, which one of these are you looking forward to the most in terms of bringing a player in?
It's got to be Tyler Bertuzzi. I mean, that guy's a top 6 player on any team in the NHL, and he brings that sandpaper that the Leafs, frankly, don't have. Bunting wanted to be that last year, and he got suspended, and every ref hated him because of it, right? Like, it's not the same element that Bertuzzi brings. Bertuzzi is a different style of player. He will play very well with Matthews or Tavares because he's not the fastest guy in the world, but he sees the ice well, which both of them do too. So super excited for Bertuzzi. And then Domi too. I mean, Domi is a guy that wants to be there. He said that since he was 2 years old and his dad was playing here. He wants to be a Leaf. He's already said publicly here that he wants to re-sign as a Leaf. So I think Domi and Bertuzzi there fitting into the top 6, even if Domi's on the third line, those are depth pieces that just that bit of grit makes a world of difference.
I love the Nyes move too. I think it might have been their best draft choice in like the last 3 or 4 years. Just the way that guy played in the playoffs. I mean, when he was in college, he was a man playing amongst children, and then he looked like he fit right in when he was in the NHL. I think this is a guy that in maybe a year or two, you could say would be potting 30 goals.
100% he could get there. If I had one concern, fellas, it's health with Samsonov, like we said, and then other than that, it's center depth. Last year you had O'Reilly in the 3 slot. A couple years ago you had Kadri. They've toyed around with some different things. Having Kampf and Gambrell as your 3-4 centers right now, it's not getting it done in the playoffs. It's not getting it done against Tampa, who's got Paul on the third line, or, I guess Boston doesn't have depth anymore, but, you want deep center core in the playoffs, and Kampf and Gambrell, I want them to make a move for a third line center there.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Those are easily my 2 biggest concerns with the Leafs too, is I think the centers, it could be all right. I mean, that's the kind of thing I think it'll get you through most of the season, but maybe make a move close to the deadline. Being the Caps fan, I'm always going to question Samsonov, not just health, but even when he's healthy, what is he? Can he hold on to his stick for more than 5 minutes? These are all questions that scientists will study for decades. So I don't know. This is part of why I feel like this division is so confusing, because I want to say the Leafs are the best team and should win the division. But when there's such a big question mark in goal, but also you could say that about most teams in the division, it's like, I don't know exactly where to put them. I do think that there's something to be said about A, the frustration they've all gone through, B, how freaking good like their best players are. And I think that should be enough to get them probably to the top of the division, regardless of what's going on in the crease. But yeah, as long as it's not like as bad as Samsonov can be at times. I mean, he's got a high ceiling and a high floor. So that's the biggest question mark for me, I guess.
And I think I was trying to say earlier, I love the Max Domi signing 1 year for $3 million, and he just had his second best year of his career between Chicago and Dallas. I think that's going to be a much needed cheap second line wing that I think Toronto's been trying to search for a while. I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Nick. How would you feel about like trading for Adam Henrique as the Leafs third line center? He can play left wing, he can play center. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I do like that. Like I said, I think third center is the weak spot. Henrique's a great two-way player there, another local guy, as half the league feels like it is every time they're linked to Toronto. But Henrique's a guy that's been on some playoff runs, has some experience under his belt, and that would be a good fit, I think. Yeah, I can picture it.
So rather than me like talking about Nylander and how much I love him, or the Matthews contract and that whole drama, do you think that the Leafs will make it to the third round or later this season?
Can we get an easier question first?
Do you think they'll win a round? How about that? I mean, you win one, right? So like you get that off your back, but like how hard that is.
It's hard. And like I said, they got outplayed by Tampa for most of that series last year. They actually look better at times in the Florida series than they did in the Tampa series. So that's where playoff hockey is a different beast. What I will say is they are probably the one playoff team from last year in the Atlantic that didn't get worse. Boston, a little bit worse. Florida, a little bit worse. Tampa, a little bit worse. I don't think there's much of a question that the Leafs will finish 1 or 2 in this division. I think that is signed, sealed, delivered. The question's the playoffs. Man, just got to see it. Like, it's similar to what we said to the Senators. I'm not going to believe it till you prove me otherwise. Like, they got to show us something beyond a 6-game first-round win or whatever it was last year. Like, it's go time in the playoffs, because regular season success does not mean anything.
Our Leafs season preview has been the same conversation since we started this 6 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Since
after the
2019.
first year. Yeah, after the
never
first year
changed.
that Matthews and the boys dragged them to the playoffs as rookies, it's been the same conversation.
It's the same conversation.
That was a great year, though. I mean, like I really enjoyed watching those games in DC. It was a ton of fun.
I'll be honest, that was my most fun year, though, because that was like no expectations, right?
Expectation.
And from there, it's only expectations and it's only depression.
Yeah, no, that's accurate. I think I would say this team is my division favorite. I think they win it. I think they probably win a round. Yeah, again, like Bowen said, it kind of depends on who they all get matched up with and everything. That's kind of a different beast, a hard thing to tackle right now. But I would lean. I mean, put it this way: Samsonov. I had the same questions about him this time last year, and he was fine for the whole season. So I would say they'll probably win the division. They're probably my pick.
I echo that. I think win the division, at least win a round. After that, I think it just depends on who you draw.
Echo that. All right. Well, I think we're all in agreement. That is the last team for the Atlantic Division. So that will wrap up our Atlantic Division preview. Mr. Bowins, we want to thank you for coming on once again. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, fellas. One last question for you guys here. Put you on the spot. Who, out of all the teams we just covered, Atlantic Division, which player leads the Atlantic Division in scoring after this upcoming season?
Ooh.
Last year it was Pasta. The year before, I believe it was Matthews or Cooch. Some interesting names.
Last year was who? Say again?
Pasta.
I'm going to say Matthews.
I think to get the most amount of money he wants for potentially his last contract, I'm going to go Steven Stamkos.
Oh, I like that's a hot one. This is tough. I'll go off the board a little. Well, not off the board, but maybe not as a popular one. I'm going to go Tage Thompson.
I wanted to say Matthews, but since Nick said it, I'll go with a total dark horse here. How about Mr. Brady Tkachuk?
Whoa.
Fuck it. Yeah, I said Brady. All
right. No, that's a tough one. It's a good division. Like every team's got some good names up front. I think it's probably Pasta, just because Bruins was in the third round. Like he hit 113 last year, and he's gonna have to take a step forward. But no, it's a hell of a division. So appreciate you fellas having me on.
Absolutely, man. We'll take it easy. Good luck this season. Go follow Hockey Collective. If you don't already, go check out the boys over there. Great follow. And yeah, man, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, boys.